Hello, good afternoon to you all. Thank you for joining today. This is one of our webinars, the next series in the series of our thought leadership that we're putting out into the market. Today's webinar is around ChatGPT, transforming conversations with AI. This one has got a little bit of my content, a little bit of content from ChatGPT itself. So it'll be a little hybrid, a co-presenter, as you will. ChatGPT has partial control of the wheel. This is part of our monthly series of webinars. So we did have one 2 weeks ago around fabric because we wanted to have an additional one. That fabric is such a hot topic on the market that we wanted to make sure that we covered that one off and broke into our normal schedule. This one is also a pretty hot topic, ChatGPT. There's been a lot of conversation in the market around ChatGPT. What is it? How can it help? What is it not? Some concerns, what are the concerns about it, etc. We will be talking a bit about that. What is ChatGPT? Some of the ways that it can play a part for you and your organization, things to consider. Then some of the risks associated with it. And then, of course, we've got to have a bit of an offering for you to be able to consider how your pickup and taking on ChatGPT and looking at how it can work in your organization. So once again, I'm presenting this today. Samantha Swain, once again, likes me to put this picture up. I've got a few more grey hairs, getting a little bit older long in the tooth. But I love presenting. I love being one of the thought leaders here at Altus. Love sharing the stories and sharing the experiences out there. As I said, this one is co-presented by ChatGPT as well. Welcome ChatGPT to the circle. Thank you very much for your input as well. So ChatGPT was only launched in November 2022. So that's only less than a year ago. It's 10 months ago. It's been pretty big since then. A lot of conversation. I think everyone from my mother, grandparents, well, my grandmother recently passed, but she, even before she passed, knew about ChatGPT. In conversations at the pub or in social circles, most people will have understood what ChatGPT is at a high level, some element of it being an AI that has got some curious and interesting perspectives on how we could do things, but not quite sure maybe on some of the particulars of how it could be used. So it's been around for a fairly short amount of time. It's had a significant investment by some players. So it's been put out by organizations like OpenAI, by some organizations put it out, and then some other organizations like Microsoft have committed large amounts of money and then investing in developing the tools further. But it's not actually owned necessarily by Microsoft, the tools, but they've invested to bring it alongside some of their offerings in the market. There's also been an explosion in end user applications. In the last several months, a lot of organizations have built solutions that at the heart of it use ChatGPT or some of the other OpenAI tool sets out there. And so it's had a massive uptake, as you can imagine, with all the conversation you've heard of it. There's a million users that were picking up ChatGPT in the first 5 days of launch, compared to, say, Instagram or Spotify, which took months to get that same sort of user base going. It's been able to go up in days where others took months to get there, other big names out there. So it's a massive uptake in the last less than year, 10 months. So what is ChatGPT? Today, we're really going to focus on a slither of ChatGPT. We're not going to concentrate on the whole thing and add all of the things it can do. It's a big, large topic. What we'd like to do is break up some of those further conversations into maybe some other thought leadership conversations or other things that we can work with you directly on. Today, we're particularly focused on a subset of it, which is some of that deep learning, machine learning. And really, it's around ChatGPT can go out there and look at a large set of data sets and then not just bring those back to you, but it's able to recognize what's in there, summarize it, and translate. It's basically summarizing what it finds and returning it back in conversational text form. It allows you to really be able to ask a question and really have it interpret what you're asking and what's out there available for it to pull back from. So it's not actually just returning the data sets, it's generating new data from the content it has basically found. And it is quite human-like conversation. I'll show you examples of that coming up. It's actually really amazingly conversational. You'll actually in many places go, wow, that's actually better than if I had summarized that same conversation myself and taken the time to read through a bunch of context and summarize that myself. This is particularly why it's quite interesting in the educational space, where students are actually using ChatGPT to do a lot of their assignment work for them, or have been recently, because it comes back with results that are actually quite tricky to pass to see if it's actually a human or an AI in there who's actually doing that work. So let's travel back in time. Let's get into our TARDIS or our DeLorean times travel. And let's go all the way back to September, this time last year. All the way back to a time barely remembered. Back in 2022, September 2022, we used to use Google. Most of us are still using Google, of course. We'd open up Google and we'd type in something like, what is the best way to test my data loads? It would come back with some results. It'd come back with a top one, something that an organization had paid an extra amount of money to have as a key link there as the top search result. It would all give you a few, did you actually mean this sort of stuff? It would give you some prompts. And then if you clicked on that, it would bring you back, maybe in this particular case, you clicked on the top one, it would bring you to some answers, and you can sort of, there's one web page that it took you to, it brought in that website had some answers potentially to it that one person, or in this case 4 people, had put together and responded to. So in this case you were seeing the responses of 4 individuals that you didn't necessarily know anything about. You'd had no idea who these people are. You knew the name here at the bottom, but you didn't know anything necessarily about if this person's an expert or not, where they'd come from, any of that type of thing. So you didn't necessarily know that trusting, and you're only getting a base result set of 4 answers to choose from. Underneath that top link were some other links there. A couple of them were software sort of vendors, specific, trying to sell you tools in there. Some of them were some best practices things, but these are individual web pages that it would take you to where you can find that specific thing, and you'd have to then go and do your actual research. This is the starting points of investigation and looking at individual points to collect your information and then do your summation and churning through that data yourself. So when I then looked at things, I thought, what I'll do is I'll get ChatGPT to be a part of this conversation. I asked ChatGPT to describe why this session might be useful for you. It's come back and given a description of what this session could be. It actually named what our webinar today is, Transforming Conversations with AI. It gave a description of it, and then it even gave key takeaways, introducing ChatGPT, talking about the conversational interfaces, best practices for that communication, and some use cases. It laid out what we should discuss to be able to better converse around the topic and make sure that you come away as a better educated on the topic than potentially when you came into it. So it was able to go away and serve that for itself. Thanks, ChatGPT, for being part of this conversation and giving us some of the content. So when we look at ChatGPT, as I was talking about, it's had significant investment. There's a large set of applications out there, and there's been a rapid adoption in the market. It creates content, including text. It also does images and video, which I'm not covering today. And it consolidates those and summarizes that information. It can translate languages, and it creates and checks code as well. It can do all of those things. It took off fast. And really, the core of what I wanted to highlight in terms of really the expansiveness of it is that ChatGPT and this is part of really this open AI stack of tools. There are these at the core, and this is only from March. This has exploded even further from then, but I wanted to put a time and place scope of where this exploded to. Remember, ChatGPT was only released in November last year, and in March this year, this is what the open AI landscape looked like. It had foundational open AI models and a whole bunch of other foundational models. Then there's a whole bunch of development tools that work on top of these models and open it up to end user applications, which are really around context and idea creation, writing assistance, generative and search assistance. There are a number of application and context sensitivities that use the build frameworks that connect to those models. So it's not just one application out there. There's a series of tools that work in there across different modules to work and scale out to do a number of different use cases. But today we're focusing on one narrow aspect of that, which you'll see in a second. So I have some reasonably simple examples of using ChatGPT. This is really to give the context of how potentially you can start considering using it or looking to use it in your roadmap of data. So, opening up ChatGPT, I use the free because it is just a webinar. I wanted to go and make it accessible to you to be able to validate and test and feel comfortable with it yourself. So I use the free ChatGPT version 3.5. Opened it up. It asks, suggests a few things that you could do with it and opens up a prompt for you to type a question. So I started off with let's ask it a question about the markets out there. What is the best data transformation tool for Snowflake? Snowflake's a good one for us today because the Snowflake World Tour is on today in Auckland. I've just come from there to do this presentation. So we're testing the market. What's the best data transformation tool for Snowflake? ChatGPT came away, replied within a few seconds. It gave you first the context of, because it's the free version 3.5, it actually has pulled some data sets from September 2021. Not more recent than that. It gives you a context time sensitivity where the free version, what data sources it's pulling from. When you pay for the slightly more advanced versions, it pulls from more updated data sets and expansions of that. It is key to see here that what it's actually returned is a series of information broken down into common, well thought out, it looks like well thought out answers. It's my last update as to this particular date. It's come back with a series of potential options here. It hasn't particularly ranked them in any way. It's laid them out so you can see those options. And it's given a number of them, 10 particular options, all of which are valid and reasonable options for it to do. And then it's particularly asked, remember that the best tool depends on your specific requirements. So it just hasn't given a list of that. It hasn't gone out, found a list and returned it. It's given you the realistic response of, you need to actually be considerate of your requirements as an organization when you look at these options and these tools as to see which is going to be the best fit for you. So it's giving you a little bit of a recommendation about your next steps, not only giving you that response, but the next step potentiality to it. I then asked it a process question. It came back with a comprehensive list of different types of testing. What I'm impressed with is it was relative to data testing. So it went away and actually found a series of different things out there, condensed it itself and summarized that into a number of different types of testing, specifically related to data loads. It came through in unit testing, integration, data profiling, all very valid considerations. What I think is important here is not that you necessarily need it to do all of these testings, or that you have to do all of these testings, but if you are someone who wanted to validate that, what am I going to really wanting to test and focus on here? This gives you a great avenue of you being able to ask this question, come back with a response to validate your considerations against. It's a good way of sanity checking your work. It's not necessarily replacing your input, it's just validating. It's giving something for you to be the human voice of connecting with this data, with this process. So this was a process question. And you can see there's a number of other tests that it's suggesting you do. It doesn't tell you necessarily how you're particularly doing it. It would be for you to implement and do those particular testings at the appropriate level for your organization. And that's really where it's appropriate to have that human voice in there to really validate what's appropriate for you to do for performance testing in your particular environment. Then I asked, should I use a surrogate key? Now, that's a good question. Surrogate keys, plenty of benefits to them. When I asked this question, it came back with a section around advantages of using a surrogate key, some good points in there: performance, uniqueness, and stability, simplicity. Great. Love it. Then it also came back, and it came also in the same response. It said when to use that. It gave some context as to the times and situations that would be useful. Very important if you're trying to consider this in your organization or in your tables and things. Then it came back with some considerations against using a surrogate key, all within the same response. It had gone away, searched all of these data sets, found this information around surrogate keys, summarized it back into 3 sections. Now, it doesn't give you really enough information for you to have actually gone, if you didn't know enough about surrogate keys, it's given you enough here to have a slightly better understanding. It's given you an equal weighting on both the pros and the cons. It hasn't given you really enough, I don't think, for you to then come away and go, well, I definitely should or should not be using surrogate keys in this case, in my situation with this type of data in this business case. So that's where you still need to have some level of experience and someone to help guide you if you need someone else to be able to validate these for your situation. But it gives you enough to be able to really contextualize some of this and why not, and gives you a base to work from. It's a great way of validating some of your processes. So in this case, in your design questions around how you're going to design some of your data structures. Then I wanted to test around financial services companies. Financial services is one of the key verticals for the New Zealand Altus business. We love doing data work in financial services and banks and insurance companies. They do great work and we want to be a part of that for them. And we've got some great history there. So I wanted to see which companies should I do a data campaign for. It came back and gave me some good advice around how to go about putting together that campaign, how to go about defining my target audience, value proposition, segmenting the market, researching those. It's come back with look for data-driven in companies, technology sophistication, understand the ones who are wanting to be more on the cutting edge. It's giving me a good profile of what sort of companies in the financial services space. Well, I suppose in this case, it's probably less financial services and more generic industry, but it's giving me a good way of understanding the profile of companies to reach out for. In this case, it's given me thoughts that I hadn't necessarily considered for a data campaign, a campaign around data services and financial services. But it hasn't really given me particularly definitive thing to say which are the companies in a bit more granular detail. It's given me some real work to be able to, when we're doing our campaign, to be able to validate against. It's really around helping me frame up that campaign and really putting some more sophistication around it. It's a wonderful tool, but it's not really replacing me putting together that campaign and knowing who, which individuals, which companies, what problems specifically we're really going to be focusing on. That really comes from our expertise and history in there. And then it says at the end of it, remember to tailor your messaging to each company you approach. So it's not only giving you some of that, how to profile it, but it's then taking you to that next level of really how to then tailor that messaging specifically for that, and how you're can specifically address their needs and challenges. So it's really good contextual information onto how to take it to that next step. So it's given you not only that summary, but really being able to summarize and start off the conversation on how to then progress from there. A wonderful co-companion on your daily work. Then I asked an advice question. Which is your best customer? Interesting. It came back and it was able to give the context of this is not something that it should be part of. As an AI, it said, I don't have my personal preferences or ability to form opinions, so don't have a best customer. My purpose is to assist and provide information to the best of my abilities. So it's giving the context of when and where it is not particularly useful, in which I think is a wonderful part of this offering, is to say, I can be useful here, not over here. And I think this is something that has grown over the last several months. Initially, when it was released, it was a little bit less often that it would come back with an answer like this. It was wanting to be more complete in the answers it was able to give. Now it's being a bit more refined, and it will continue to be refined to be more open with where the boundaries of its use can be. But I thought that was a really good ability for it to come back to you and say, don't use me now. So in terms of its limitations and concerns, of course, there are many, and it's important to consider these for sure. I personally think if you look at some of those previous examples, it's worth considering how that can tie into your organization. In smaller teams, it's a good way of having something to validate some of your approaches across. In a larger organization, or one that's had a very strong, stable internal team that's been working for a long time, it's a good way of testing some new things and some of the approaches you've had against something without necessarily having to take on those suggestions. It's a good part of being part of your process is embedding and enriching the way you do things, both as a data team, but in all sorts of different business processes. In terms of those limitations, potentially if you're wherever, depending on what data set you're opening it up for using, if you wanted to open it up to using some of your internal data, or if it's potentially reaching out broadly to other data sets you don't know, you could potentially consider that it might be breaching privacy or confidentiality, depending on where it's reaching out to. If you're opening it up into internal data sets and you don't have constraints around where it's searching for, you'll obviously have private data internally or confidential data that you are then potentially opening up for returning into result sets. There's also AI hallucination. It's responding to you in a way that makes you feel like it must be logical and reasonable, the answers, and you can trust it, when you don't necessarily know that you can trust those answers. Well, the answers around, should I use a surrogate key, true and appropriate? You're not sure, but it seemed logical enough and complete enough, that list, and broken up into the right sections that you could fully trust it. But you don't necessarily know. The way it's responding and the literature, the way it is written, it comes back and makes it feel very trustworthy. You do have to be a little bit skeptical to start with, so until you feel comfortable enough with the context on how you'll be using those answers. Then there's obviously some security around it and lack of transparency and what data sets are returning. Remember when we looked at the Google example at the start, it said those 4 answers, and then it actually had the names of the people who those answers were. You didn't know those 4 people, but you knew as there were 4 answers and what users they were. Here it's going out, you don't know where that surrogate key information came from. It could be from one source, it could be from 1,000 sources, it could be from 1,000,000 sources. We don't know, but you don't necessarily know particularly what has returned there. And you don't necessarily know what bias it has in there. If it went out and a lot of the data sets that's coming is from a particular country or a particular type of organization or things, it can give certain biases to the results that you maybe weren't even aware would happen in the data. So these are all considerations. For us, we have Charles Chiariki in our team. He's our Chief Security Officer, Security and Risk Officer. He and his team are well aware of that and have been spending time working to build the framework, the scoping of where and how and what's appropriate for how we collect and use data for usage of things like ChatGPT, what type of problems and where it's appropriate for us to use these tools. Those are strong considerations for your organisation, and we can play a great part in helping you with these and where you could use these tools, orchestrating not only the privacy side and the security side and the collection side, but also the usage side. But I put this at the end because I think it's always best to start with those use cases, those examples at the start of where you could use it, then make sure you encompass considerations around the limitations and concerns. Obviously, the benefits are pretty obvious, I think. There's a productivity increase. If you were to go off and spend your time looking up how to test things, you could take, several hours or a period of time to go off and look at those different returns in Google, go through a different bunch of links and manually collate that information. Here you can type in ChatGPT, it came back within seconds, even less than a second really, and you've suddenly got those answers to validate. That really decreases your amount of time that you're researching and investigating those things. It gives you a different viewpoint to give you robustness on your answers. It allows you to validate your responses by you putting down your considerations, what you think you'd do in this thing. It goes out, you can ask the question, it comes back with something for you to bounce those ideas against. And then it works from a larger pool of knowledge. If you've got a good team that's been around for a while and you trust each other, a potential downside of that is that you may start to be more consistent in your thought. And it's nice to be able to test it with some new thoughts in there. So using ChatGPT will go out to a larger pool of knowledge to expand from. Of course, being a webinar, we have to give an offering to the market. And we are offering, if you sign up soon, we can, in the next 30 days, we can give you a free day of an environment review and discussion with where ChatGPT could play a part in your organization. What type of scenarios do you have where ChatGPT could play a part in enriching your processes, modernizing them, reducing your time, reducing your errors around particular business processes? Reach out to us, the regional managers and your local Alta sales team, if you want to hear more information. So that's today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining. This was on ChatGPT. It was a high-level introduction around a slice of ChatGPT, where it can be used, the context of the type of problems that I see it potentially being quite useful for at the moment. We will be going into further exploratory conversations around OpenAI and where it can be used in the context of that in further webinars. Hope you'll join us in those. This session is going to be recorded, and so we'll send you that so you can share this conversation amongst others in your team. Thank you very much for your time. Now let me just pass across I'll stop sharing. Let me just pass across to Samantha Swain. Samantha Swain, can you just let me know if there are any questions or in the Q&A or the chat? No questions, said Samantha Swain. let me know, anyone, if they do have a question, just put it into the chat or the Q&A. But I do want to thank you for your time. It's lovely to be able to do a little bit of thought leadership and share that out into the market. If you do have any further, we have a calendar of future sessions, but if you have a topic that you'd like to hear about, let us know. Send an email through to myself or Samantha Swain, or have a look at our website for the upcoming webinars. We've got I think a good range of topics that I think will be topical for you and your organisation. So I'll be hoping that you'd like some of those and come into some future sessions. No other questions have come up, so thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.